The most evil mothers in American history, what they did will haunt you. Welcome back to Justice Reversed. These are the stories the justice system doesn't want you to forget. Number 1, Andrea Yates. A quiet suburban morning unraveled into horror the moment 5 young lives were lost in a single act of maternal destruction. Andrea Yates was a 36-year-old mother of 5 in Houston, Texas, by all appearances, a caregiver overwhelmed but devoted. Yet on June 20th, 2001, after her husband left for work, she calmly filled the bathtub and drowned her children, Noah, age 7, John, 5, Paul, 3, Luke, 2, and baby Mary, just 6 months old. When authorities arrived, the bodies were already laid out, and Andrea quietly confessed. She later admitted the killings had been planned for weeks. Her composure, her clarity, and the logistical detail disturbed even seasoned prosecutors. Yates had a long-documented history of severe psychiatric illness. She had suffered from bulimia, depression, and multiple psychotic episodes. Diagnosed with postpartum psychosis and schizoaffective disorder, she had been hospitalized multiple times, attempted suicide, and warned doctors she was having homicidal thoughts. Despite these red flags, she was allowed to stop medication and left alone with all 5 children. Experts had urged her not to have more kids, warning of risks to both herself and her family. Those warnings went unheeded. In 2002, she was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. But the conviction was overturned after a prosecution expert falsely testified about a fictional law and order episode. At her retrial in 2006, Andrea was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Jurors concluded she could not distinguish right from wrong at the time of the killings. Instead of returning to prison, she was committed to a state psychiatric hospital, where she remains today under supervision. She has declined release, stating she is still mentally unwell. The Yates case remains a turning point in how America views postpartum mental illness. It shocked not only for the act itself, but for the warning signs that had been present, visible, documented, and ignored. From this tragedy, several critical lessons emerged that may help prevent such horror in the future. Postpartum psychosis is a red flag. It requires swift intervention, not passive observation. Stopping psychiatric medication must never happen without close medical supervision. Relapse can be sudden and fatal. Families and medical professionals must act on red flags. Delusions, social withdrawal, and past suicide attempts are not private struggles, they are urgent warnings. Andrea Yates' story is a devastating lesson in missed chances. Her children died not in chaos but in silence. And silence, in mental illness, is never just quiet, it's a warning we cannot afford to ignore. Number 2, Diane Downs. A late spring night in Oregon turned from tragic to unthinkable when a wounded mother arrived at the hospital, her 3 children clinging to life, one already gone. In May 1983, 27-year-old Diane Downs drove her red Nissan into the emergency entrance of a Springfield hospital. She claimed a carjacker had ambushed her on a rural road and opened fire. Yet her calm demeanor, preoccupation with her vehicle, and inconsistent story raised immediate suspicion. Her children had all been shot. 7-year-old Cheryl was dead, 8-year-old Christy severely injured, and 3-year-old Danny paralyzed. Diane had only a superficial wound to her forearm. Investigators quickly uncovered inconsistencies. There was no sign of a struggle or a suspect. The .22 caliber handgun linked to the shooting matched one Diane had owned but claimed to have lost. And in a chilling turn, Christy, after surviving a stroke and learning to speak again, told authorities the truth: her mother had pulled the trigger. Prosecutors alleged Diane's motive was romantic. She had been involved with a man who did not want children. Rather than give up the relationship, she chose to eliminate what he saw as obstacles. In court, she appeared unmoved, smiling, making flippant remarks, and referring to herself as the real victim for not being able to tie her shoes. Psychological evaluations diagnosed her with antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders. The jury convicted her of murder and attempted murder in 1984. She received a life sentence plus 50 years. But even prison did not mark the end. In 1987, she escaped for 10 days before being recaptured. Since then, she has been transferred between high-security prisons in multiple states. At every parole hearing, she has maintained her innocence. What made Diane Downs' case so shocking wasn't just the crime, it was the betrayal. A mother turning on her own children, calculated and calm, shattered the public's sense of maternal instinct. It raised urgent questions about how we recognize warning signs when the threat hides in plain sight. While the legal system responded forcefully, cases like this compelled broader awareness. Here's what families and communities must take away. Not all maternal behavior signals love. Emotional detachment or odd calm after trauma should trigger deeper scrutiny. Children's words matter. Even fragmented testimony can hold the truth adults miss or ignore. Romantic obsession can override parental instinct. When a partner becomes more important than a child's safety, intervention is urgent. Diane Downs' trial offered a harsh truth. Sometimes, evil isn't hidden in the shadows. It rides in the passenger seat, smiles for the camera, and drives straight into a hospital lot. Her story is a reminder that not all threats come from strangers. Some wear familiar faces and smile when they lie. Number 3, Susan Smith. She stood weeping before the cameras, begging for her son's return. But behind the tears was a secret that would soon horrify the country. On October 25, 1994, Susan Smith, 23, claimed her car had been hijacked by a black man who drove off with her 2 young sons inside. For 9 days, the nation watched in sympathy and suspense. But there were no leads, no witnesses, and no evidence to support her story. Then, on November 3rd, she confessed. She had driven her Mazda to a lake in Union, South Carolina, strapped in 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, released the brake, and watched the car roll into the water. A diver later testified he saw a child's hand against the glass. Susan initially told police she planned to die alongside her sons but lost her nerve. Investigators doubted this. Her story had changed repeatedly, and her behavior raised concerns. She seemed detached, even cheerful at times with law enforcement. The investigation revealed that Susan had recently been rejected by a man named Tom Findley, who ended their brief relationship because he didn't want children. Prosecutors argued she killed her sons to remove that obstacle. She was charged with 2 counts of murder and stood trial in 1995. Though psychiatrists testified she suffered from major depression and dependent personality disorder, the jury found her guilty. Some members were swayed not to impose the death penalty, believing a life sentence would be a heavier burden. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. What made Susan Smith's case especially disturbing was not only the murder, but the lie. Her claim about a black carjacker ignited fear and suspicion in a community already grappling with racial tensions. Innocent men were interrogated, harassed, and blamed. Civil rights leaders condemned her for weaponizing racial stereotypes to shield herself from suspicion. Today, Susan remains incarcerated. Her record in prison includes misconduct, self-harm, and inappropriate relationships. In 2024, she was denied parole after widespread public opposition. Despite years behind bars, her story continues to stir outrage, not just for what she did, but for how she manipulated perception. Cases like this highlight how deception can derail justice and blur the line between grief and guilt. The takeaways are chilling but necessary. Grief can be performed. Not all tears signal truth. Calculated deception can delay justice. Romantic rejection and narcissism are a dangerous mix. When children become obstacles, intervention must be swift. Weaponizing race for cover is not just immoral, it endangers lives. Always demand evidence when serious accusations arise. Her story lingers not because it shocked the nation, but because it reminded us how easy it is to believe a mother's grief, even when it's a performance. Number 4, Megan Huntsman. The garage smelled of dust and silence until police opened the boxes. Inside, wrapped in cloth, sealed in plastic, and stored in cardboard, were the remains of 6 newborn infants. It wasn't the discovery of a single crime. It was the unsealing of a decade-long secret, hidden in plain sight inside a quiet Utah neighborhood. In 2014, Megan Huntsman was arrested at age 39. But her crimes had begun years earlier. Between 1996 and 2006, she secretly gave birth to 7 babies. 1 was stillborn. The other 6 she killed within minutes of delivery. She strangled or suffocated them, wrapped the bodies in towels or t-shirts, sealed them in trash bags, and hid them in boxes in her garage. No one knew. Not her husband. Not her surviving daughters. Not even neighbors. She wore baggy clothes, avoided doctors, and disappeared during pregnancies. There were no medical records. No birth certificates. Just silence and then death. The truth came to light when Darren West, newly released from prison and cleaning the garage, opened one of the boxes. Inside was the mummified corpse of a baby. He called the police. Within hours, investigators found 6 more bodies. What began as a welfare check became one of Utah's most disturbing homicide cases. Huntsman confessed immediately, without visible emotion. She told detectives she couldn't raise more children and didn't want to bring them into the chaos of her life, one marked by meth addiction, alcoholism, and emotional instability. Her father's suicide in 2012 had worsened her spiral. All I focused on was the next fix, she told police. Prosecutors presented the murders not as breakdowns but as deliberate choices. The judge called her actions the most egregious and heinous he'd ever seen. She pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder and was sentenced to 6 terms of 5 years to life, with 3 to be served consecutively. Her first possible parole is in 2064, when she'll be nearly 90. Psychologists acknowledged she may have suffered from postpartum psychosis, but the planning and repetition pointed elsewhere. Each killing was isolated, concealed, and controlled. No panic. No cries for help. Just method, silence, and concealment. Even hardened detectives were shaken. One officer said, with each box, we were more and more shocked. Neighbors, friends, even her own family were left stunned. Her daughters, however, remembered a different woman, one who made dinner, laughed, and kept a tidy home. But the boxes told another story. So did the silence. And from that silence come critical warnings we cannot ignore. Unexplained absences during pregnancy, with no baby afterward, must raise immediate concern. Addiction can mask methodical behavior. Repetition without remorse signals deeper danger. Don't be fooled by appearances. A tidy home and quiet demeanor don't mean safety. This wasn't just a story of hidden crime. It was a tragedy no one asked to see until it was far too late. Number 5. Marybeth Tinning. Grief doesn't usually raise suspicion. But in Duanesburg, New York, one woman's mourning became a mystery that spanned over a decade and claimed 9 young lives. Between 1971 and 1985, Marybeth Tinning lost all 9 of her children, 8 biological and 1 adopted. Their deaths, each sudden and unexplained, were attributed to various causes: seizure disorders, infections, sudden infant death syndrome. Doctors offered condolences, not suspicion. But with each funeral, doubt crept closer. Jennifer, her first daughter, died at just 8 days old. Weeks later, her brother Joseph Jr. was gone. Then Timothy, Nathan, Mary Frances, Barbara, Michael, Jonathan, and finally, in 1985, 4-month-old Tammy Lynn. This last death raised alarms. Investigators found no consistent genetic cause. Even Michael, the adopted child, had died under her care. There was no medical link, only proximity to Marybeth. During interrogation, Marybeth confessed to smothering Tammy Lynn. She would later recant, but the damage was done. Her confession, combined with evidence of suspicious behavior, such as attempting to poison her husband and inducing premature labor, painted a damning picture. Prosecutors charged her with second-degree murder under the standard of depraved indifference to human life. It didn't require proving intent, only that she allowed death to happen when she had the power to stop it. In 1987, she was convicted and sentenced to 20 years to life. Psychiatric evaluations noted traits of narcissism and deep emotional need. While not formally diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, her behavior mirrored it, a caregiver seeking attention through inflicted suffering. Her own past was dark: abuse, suicide attempts, feelings of worthlessness. But the court ruled she knew right from wrong. The conviction sparked national conversations. How could so many children die in one home without intervention? Forensic investigators across the country revised their approach to repeated infant deaths. The idea that 1 is tragedy, 2 is suspicion, 3 is murder became a standard in child death investigations. Marybeth remained in prison for 31 years. Her parole was denied 6 times. In 2018, at age 75, she was released under strict supervision, still in the same town where she once buried child after child. Many neighbors never forgot. Some had once comforted her at funerals. Now they wondered how long they had mourned beside a killer. The horror of Marybeth's case wasn't just in the deaths, it was in the system's silence. From that silence, 3 critical warnings emerge. Multiple child deaths in a single family, no matter how tragic, must prompt forensic scrutiny. Emotional distress in caregivers after repeated trauma should trigger psychological evaluations. Medical professionals must connect fatal patterns across cases involving the same guardian. Marybeth Tinning's case wasn't just about the failure of one mother, it exposed a systemic reluctance to question what seemed too sad to be sinister. And 9 children paid the price. Number 6. China P. Arnold. A humid summer night in Dayton, Ohio, turned into a crime scene that would haunt the nation. On August 30th, 2005, 25-year-old China P. Arnold walked into the emergency room carrying the lifeless body of her 28-day-old daughter, Paris Talley. The infant had severe burns and was unresponsive. Arnold claimed it was an accident, but the signs didn't add up. Doctors quickly noticed Paris's skin showed little external trauma, but Paris's internal body temperature measured between 107 and 108 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond what could be caused by an ordinary burn. It was a contradiction only explainable by one chilling conclusion: the baby had been placed in a microwave. The medical examiner confirmed this, saying she was cooked. Arnold did not bring Paris in immediately. Hours had passed since the child's death. Investigators found what appeared to be layers of skin at the bottom of Arnold's bathtub. Neighbors reported no signs of emergency the night before. The motive, according to testimony from a cellmate, was jealousy and fear. Arnold was arguing with her boyfriend, Terrell Talley, about whether Paris was his child. Afraid he might leave her, she allegedly chose to eliminate the baby to preserve the relationship. Police arrested Arnold for aggravated murder. What followed was a complex legal battle. Her first trial in 2006 ended in mistrial. The second, in 2008, led to a conviction and life sentence, but that was overturned in 2010 due to prosecutorial misconduct. In 2011, a third trial concluded with a unanimous guilty verdict. Arnold was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Psychologists noted Arnold was not psychotic but suffered from depression and substance abuse. Her defense argued she was blackout drunk and incapable of intent. Prosecutors countered that placing a baby in a microwave required sequential, purposeful action. Her attorneys filed multiple appeals, including claims of racial bias and constitutional violations, but the Ohio Supreme Court upheld the conviction in 2014. China Arnold is currently serving her sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. The public reaction was visceral. The press labeled her the microwave baby killer. Civil rights leaders questioned the fairness of her trial, but prosecutors stood by the verdict, pointing to the overwhelming physical and testimonial evidence. The murder of Paris Talley wasn't just rare, it was unfathomable. And it leaves behind not just grief, but lasting lessons about violence, accountability, and intervention. From this tragedy, we draw some urgent warnings. Extreme infant injuries, especially with delay in care, must raise immediate suspicion. Paternity conflict mixed with unstable emotion can escalate into fatal harm. Substance use may blur intent but doesn't erase accountability. Paris Talley will never grow up. But in understanding what happened to her, we sharpen our collective ability to prevent the next silent tragedy. Number 7. Veronica Youngblood. Veronica Youngblood told her daughters they were having a special girls' night. But behind the motherly smile was a mind consumed by revenge. Hours later, both children lay dying, not from illness or accident, but from bullets fired by the woman they trusted most. The tragedy unfolded in 2018 in Fairfax County, Virginia. Veronica, 33, had just lost a brutal custody battle. Her ex-husband, Ron Youngblood, was awarded full custody of their youngest daughter, 5-year-old Brooklyn. That ruling marked the end of Veronica's hope and the beginning of a plan she would carry out with chilling precision. She gave Brooklyn and her 15-year-old half-sister Sharon gummies laced with sleeping medication. As the girls drifted off, Veronica retrieved a handgun she had purchased just days before. Brooklyn, barely conscious, was shot in the head at close range. Sharon, though sedated, managed to call 911 after being shot twice. In her final breath, she whispered, "My mom shot me." Brooklyn was pronounced dead at the scene. Sharon died later at the hospital. Veronica confessed to planning the murders and intending to take her own life afterward. But she didn't. Instead, she waited as investigators uncovered one of the most disturbing cases of maternal filicide in Virginia's recent history. At trial, prosecutors laid bare the methodical nature of the crime. The gun was legally purchased. The sedatives were intentional. This wasn't a psychotic break, it was, they argued, revenge. The court heard Sharon's haunting 911 call. Jurors cried. Some sought therapy. Veronica's defense attorneys presented a grim past, raised in poverty in Argentina, abused by her grandfather, beaten by her father, and later forced into prostitution to feed her first child. They claimed her actions were rooted in untreated trauma and mental illness. But the jury saw the calculated steps, a purchased weapon, premeditated sedation, the targeted killings. They rejected an insanity plea. In March 2023, Veronica was sentenced to 78 years, 36 years for each murder, and 6 more for the firearm charge. Now 38, she will likely die in prison. Her attorneys have promised an appeal, but no movement has gained public support. As the courtroom emptied, grief lingered like a shadow over every seat. Ron Youngblood, devastated, sat through every minute of the trial. I never thought she was capable of this, he said. This wasn't just a crime. It was betrayal at the deepest level. And behind it lies a lesson, one we can't afford to ignore. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers, they're family. Veronica Youngblood's case forces us to pay attention and ask harder questions. If you're a parent, educator, or friend, here are 3 red flags that should never be dismissed. Revenge rooted in custody loss can turn lethal, especially when paired with untreated trauma. Acquiring weapons amid emotional collapse must raise red flags. Children voicing fear or isolation need urgent intervention, not assumptions. These signs don't always lead to tragedy, but when they do, it's often too late. Stay alert, intervene early, and don't assume someone's history excuses their present danger. Because even love, when twisted by rage, can become lethal. Number 8. Rachel Henry. She laid them out on the couch like they were sleeping. 3 small children, dressed, positioned gently, side by side, Mariah, nearly 2, and baby Catalea, just 7 months. To arriving responders, it appeared peaceful. But none of the children would ever wake up. There was no heartbeat, no movement, only stillness born of horror. Rachel Henry, 22, was their mother. The killings happened inside their Phoenix home in January 2020. Over the course of hours, Rachel smothered each child. Mariah was first. As she struggled, her brother Zane tried to protect her, hitting their mother, shouting. But he was no match. Rachel sang to him his favorite lullaby, while she pressed her hand over his mouth and nose until he stopped moving. Catalea, still breastfeeding, was last. Rachel confessed everything. No break-in. No accident. Just a grim, calculated unraveling. Her motive? She claimed she didn't remember. Investigators weren't convinced. Rachel had a long history of methamphetamine use. Her children had been removed from her custody before due to substance abuse. Family had tried to step in, but support systems failed or came too late. Prosecutors called the crime deliberate, cruel, and inexcusable. Initially, the state considered the death penalty. Ultimately, she accepted a plea deal, 3 counts of first-degree murder in exchange for life sentences. In February 2025, 5 years after the killings, she was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without parole. During sentencing, her attorneys described her history: childhood trauma, mental illness, substance addiction, and postpartum depression. A court psychologist diagnosed her with dissociative disorders and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. They argued she was severely impaired, lost inside her mind. Prosecutors disagreed. This, they said, was not one breakdown, it was 3 separate decisions. The courtroom was hushed as Judge Jeffrey Fish imposed the sentence. He spoke each child's name: Zane, Mariah, Catalea, and said each deserved individual justice. First responders who discovered the bodies reported deep psychological trauma. Some have since left the force. Rachel Henry now serves her time at Perryville Prison. No appeal is pending. No clemency has been requested. And no one expects her to walk free again. Though the court reached a verdict, the questions it raised are far from settled. Because when a mother turns killer, society doesn't just demand justice, it demands understanding. That's where the warnings come in. Because tragedies like this don't begin with murder, they begin with missed signs. From this tragedy, 3 key warnings must be heard. Substance relapse after regaining custody must trigger immediate review and oversight. Emotional withdrawal in caregivers, especially postpartum, should never be dismissed. Talk of death involving children is a critical warning, not poetic despair. These aren't just red flags. They're responsibilities. In Rachel Henry's case, too many chances passed by, and 3 young lives ended before anyone intervened. Number 9. Julissa Thaler. She searched online for how much blood a 6-year-old could lose before death. She bought a shotgun. She practiced at a range. And then, on May 20th, 2022, in Mound, Minnesota, Julissa Thaler sat in her car, her son Eli Hart in the back seat, and pulled the trigger again and again, until his voice was silenced forever. Eli, just 6 years old, was shot up to 9 times with a 12-gauge shotgun. Prosecutors described the act as deliberate and strategic, a cold attempt to prevent Eli's father from gaining full custody. Julissa, 28, had previously lost custody due to psychotic behavior, drug addiction, and documented mental health issues. Despite multiple warnings from Eli's father, Torrey Hart, and repeated red flags, family court returned custody to her just weeks before the killing. What followed was disturbingly calculated. She searched for life insurance policies on Eli, practiced with a friend at a gun range, and bought ammunition, asking for shells that could blow the biggest hole. After the murder, she wrapped Eli's body in a blanket and placed him in the trunk of her car. The next morning, police pulled her over for erratic driving. They found blood on her hands, spent shell casings in the vehicle, and ultimately, Eli's body wrapped and still. The evidence was overwhelming: gunshot residue, blood-soaked materials, and brain matter in the car. Surveillance footage, online search history, and ballistic tests confirmed what investigators already suspected. Julissa was charged with first-degree murder. At trial, her defense insisted on her innocence, but the jury deliberated less than 2 hours before delivering a unanimous guilty verdict. On February 16, 2023, Judge J. Quam sentenced her to life in prison without parole. "What I can't imagine," he said, "is that the person who took this child from the world is the same person who brought him into it." Julissa had declined a plea deal that offered 40 years. She chose trial and lost. In the aftermath, Eli's father filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Dakota County officials, alleging negligence. His documented warnings about Julissa's instability were ignored. Now, with no appeal filed and no advocacy group defending her, Julissa Thaler serves her sentence in a Minnesota correctional facility alone. But the legacy of this case reaches beyond courtrooms. It exposes cracks in the child protection system and reminds us that tragedy often comes with sirens we choose not to hear. Because long before Eli was killed, the danger was visible. And that leads us here: 3 urgent lessons every adult should remember before it's too late. Custody rulings should never override documented warnings about mental instability or violence. Search histories involving weapons or child harm must prompt immediate intervention. When a high-risk parent acquires firearms, it's not a coincidence, it's a countdown. Julissa Thaler's crime was premeditated. The danger wasn't hidden, it was documented, ignored, and allowed to escalate. Number 10. Lamora Williams. She dialed 911, her voice shaking, her words frantic. "The stove was laying on my son, my other son, brains, on the floor." It was October 2017, in Atlanta, Georgia. Lamora Williams, 24, claimed she had returned home to find her 2 sons dead. But the truth was far more disturbing. Investigators quickly determined that Lamora herself had placed her sons into a hot oven and turned it on. The victims were Jakarta, age 1, and Kuyant, age 2. Their bodies bore injuries consistent with extended exposure to dry heat. The oven, authorities said, had been used as a murder weapon. Prosecutors later called the act calculated, methodical, and unimaginably cruel. Lamora's 3rd child, Jamil Jr., age 3, was found alive but traumatized. Williams was charged with 14 criminal counts, including 2 murders, 4 felony murders, multiple counts of child cruelty, and making false statements. At her trial, forensic experts testified about burn patterns and autopsy reports. One described the thermal injuries as prolonged and targeted. Lamora pleaded not guilty, claiming she had found the scene as she reported in her call. But her version unraveled quickly. The jury heard damning evidence: no signs of forced entry, no footprints but hers, and the stove's own position matching burn patterns on the children. Prosecutors said it wasn't a moment of madness, but a series of deliberate choices. Her family testified about her declining mental state. Her mother and sister described signs of deep instability, hallucinations, and suicidal ideation. Records showed Lamora had struggled with mental illness since adolescence and had been placed on suicide watch during pretrial detention. Court dates were delayed multiple times to allow for psychiatric evaluations. Despite these considerations, in November 2024, the jury found her guilty on all counts. Fulton County Superior Court sentenced her to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 35 years. The judge cited the sheer brutality and betrayal involved, stating that no child should meet this end, especially not at the hands of their mother. In the aftermath, the media focused heavily on two aspects: the disturbing use of a kitchen appliance to carry out the killings, and the systemic failure to intervene despite known mental health warnings. Advocates emphasized that Lamora's breakdown had been long in the making and tragically ignored. Which raises the real question: what can we learn from a case like this? What Lamora Williams' case teaches us is stark but clear. Visible signs of mental collapse in caregivers demand urgent intervention, not sympathy, not delay. Repeated threats or bizarre behavior around children must trigger protective action. Isolation in high-stress homes isn't privacy, it's often a precursor to tragedy. Mental illness doesn't absolve violence, but ignoring it lets danger grow unchecked until it's too late. They weren't strangers. They weren't monsters in the dark. They were mothers, trusted, familiar, and what they did is almost too disturbing to believe. These aren't just crimes, they're psychological fractures, often rooted in untreated postpartum disorders, trauma, and buried rage. And the most terrifying part? Many of the warning signs were there and ignored. If you're drawn to the real, the raw, and the deeply unsettling truths behind America's darkest crimes, subscribe now to Justice Reversed and hit the bell so you'll be the first to uncover what's coming next. In our next episode, we'll dive into a case where a mother's love turned lethal, and what she left behind stunned even veteran detectives. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, the most chilling stories are always true.